I think there's still a lot of disappointment, resentment that the outcome was, a failed referendum. But I think there's also a lot of optimism that as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we're fairly resilient, although there are still a lot of concerns because of the outcome of the referendum, and I guess a lot of people are still hurting, and there's a bewilderment out there that we didn't get the level of support that we believe we should have received or we thought we were going to receive.
I do want to get to your optimism in a moment, but the first Closing the Gap report since the referendum was delivered in August showed that key measures to close the gap had gone backwards. It showed the number of Indigenous Australians imprisoned, taking their own life, losing their children to out-of-home care have all increased. How did the result of the referendum play into the future of closing the gap?
Well, I think not on the targets themselves, because, and I think one of the concerns that many of us have is that the close the gap targets are measured on annual progression, which is useful, but it's not accurate, because any sort of population change does require many years, and that's why when I first proposed it way back in 2005, the targets, they were a 25-year set of targets. But a lot of that was about having consistent policy, engagement, full engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, needs-based funding, and making sure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs was apolitical and that was approached from a bipartisan position. But we know that history has shown that with changes of government, changes of ministers, we see changes of policy direction and reviews, and so it's always one step forward and three steps backwards and in Indigenous affairs, and that's the real concern that we have. We have targets. The consistent application of those through funding support is a bit erratic at the moment, and but we hope that the future, and particularly depending upon the outcome of the next election, we will see the consistent approach, and there's examples of programs that have received bipartisan support that are really having an impact.
After the result of the referendum, there was a lot of talk about the path forward and where to now. What has that looked like over the last year?
Very mixed. Indeed, what we've seen at the federal level is really not a great deal. There's been some very good levels of support. There's been some good coordination by the Prime Minister and also the former Minister for First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs, and the way that they've been able to work with First Ministers and other state and territory governments to coordinate approaches, which is really welcomed, and we've seen that translate into some action, particularly at the state and territory level, but there seems to be always still a lot. Things don't get bedded down enough to enable the community to have some confidence to move forward. So we're seeing at the national level work being done, but the real impact is happening at the state and territory level. But in saying that, changes of government may bring changes to the policy approach.
Just finally and briefly, do you still hold out hope that there will be constitutional change that will allow for some sort of Indigenous voice to Parliament? Do you still see that as the best path forward?
Look, it is the best path forward, because what we're seeing, and the whole purpose of the referendum was to establish a voice in the Constitution, which meant that Indigenous affairs wasn't subjected to the government of the day, and that we had mechanisms in place that could only be changed through you know, through and particularly mechanisms to affect Indigenous voices and approaches to government, that they can only be changed through a referendum. But you know, I was at a First Nations housing conference earlier in the week, and Indigenous housing is a prime example of the number of different government policies and programs that have meant that we are not able to achieve outcomes. Whereas you look at the program that I'm involved with, the Tackling Indigenous Smoking program, that for 14 years has enjoyed bipartisan support and continues to grow. And on the ground, we're seeing, you know, massive successes. But that's, you know, the prime example of what can happen if we have a bipartisan, apolitical approach. But I think into the future, it's going to rely a lot on the independents and minor parties to be able to honour what they supported, as well as Labor, in going forward with a voice and engagement with Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people, and all of those key approaches that I've just mentioned.